In a remote Mexican village named Comala, there lived a man named Pedro Páramo, whose son Juan comes to this village to find him. But here, things happen to him that he could never have imagined. After uncovering the dark mysteries of Comala, Juan realizes that coming here was his biggest mistake. To know who Pedro Paramo really is and the secret of this village, one must watch the movie based on Juan Rulfo's classic Mexican novel, Pedro Páramo. Juan Preciado's mother, Dolorita, died 7 days ago. Her last wish was for Juan to meet his father and claim his share of the inheritance. With that goal, Juan travels to the remote village of Comala to find his father, Pedro Páramo. Juan stands alone in the middle of the vast Mexican desert. In the distance, a man is seen traveling somewhere with donkeys. When asked, the man says he knows the way to Comala, so Juan follows him toward the path of his dreams. The man's name is Abundio Martinez. During their conversation, it is revealed that Juan has never seen his father and has only heard his name. Hearing Pedro's name, Abundio laughs and says, "I am also Pedro's son, and he died several years ago." Juan is stunned, at a loss for words. Juan is caught between belief and disbelief. After showing him the way to Comala, Abundio walks off on his own path. Juan arrives in the village and is taken aback. Comala is nothing like what his mother had described. It is a deserted, ghostly place. It seems no one has stepped foot here for years. Abundio had told him to find Edgeviges to stay in the village. While searching for the house, a woman named Dorotea, dressed in black and clutching a dead child to her chest, pointed out Edgeviges' home. The entire house was cluttered with endless furniture. Upon asking, he learned that the villagers left these things behind before abandoning the place. Edgeviges gave Juan a small attic to stay in and asked, "You are Dolorita's son, right?" Juan was startled by her question. "Actually, your mother told me you were coming." Juan asks in surprise, "But mother is dead. How could you have known?" Edgeviges laughs and says, "Dolores is my friend. Who would know better than I?" While sitting down to eat, Edgeviges says, "Actually, the opportunity came for your mother, but for some reason it didn't work out." Juan becomes even more confused. In fact, on the night Dolorita married Pedro, she was having her period. So, on the wedding night, Dolorita asked Edgeviges to go in her place. But Pedro, drunk and passed out, had fallen into a deep sleep that night. Everything was going well with Dolorita, but because she stood up to Pedro's harsh nature, he sent her away to her sister's house in Colima. Next, the story of Pedro's son, Miguel Páramo, is told. A son Juan never knew existed. Miguel, the sole heir to Pedro's property, was the spitting image of his father. From a young age, he was addicted to preying on multiple women. He would often spend his nights at Edgeviges' house. Then, after becoming obsessed with a girl from Comala, he would return home after midnight. But on that day, he never made it back. It is still remembered that the village priest wanted to pray to God for him that day. They say that if the priest doesn't pray for a soul, the restless spirit remains trapped in this world after death. The priest's refusal was fueled by a personal grudge. Miguel had assaulted his niece. Furthermore, Miguel was the one who murdered the priest's brother. However, things didn't go the way the niece had hoped. By flashing enough money, Pedro forced the priest to pray for his son's salvation anyway. Pedro knows the priest is greedy and will go against God for the right price. For example, when a woman from Comala went to the priest after her sister took her own life, the priest claimed God doesn't forgive such a sin. However, if money was arranged, he would pray for her soul's peace. But who would provide the money? As a result, the woman's sister never found peace. And that dead woman is none other than Edgeviges herself. After telling Juan the story, Edgeviges vanishes with her candle. No matter how hard he looks, Juan finds no trace of her. The sound of agonizing cries begins to echo through the house. A man's scream echoes through the house. Terrified, Juan returns to the attic and sees another woman entering with a lantern. Her name is Damiana. Hearing of Juan's arrival, she rushed over from Media Luna. From what his mother told him, Damiana cared for Juan when he was a child. Gaining courage from her presence, He tells her about the crying and the man's screams. But Damiana says there is nothing to fear. These are just echoes of the past. One evening, Toribio came to this house to meet the local Don, Fulgur, about land deals. Toribio wanted to use Fulgur to strip the powerful Pedro of his authority. But he didn't realize that Fulgur was actually Pedro's right-hand man. Following orders, he killed Toribio by hanging him and cutting off his breath. In fact, Fulgur is a native of Media Luna. When the area was buried in debt and Dolores' family wanted to buy the land, Pedro instead quickly married her younger daughter, Dolorita, Juan's mother, and took the land for himself. On the wedding day, everyone celebrated with food and drink. And whatever leftovers remained, Damiana secretly gave to Dorotea. Everyone looked down on her as an outcast. It was at this moment that Dolorita, because of her period, asked Edgeviges to spend the night with the drunken Pedro. And this is exactly what Edgeviges had told Juan. After finishing the story, Juan walked with Damiana along the dark, silent road toward Pedro's house. Damiana says, every alleyway here is full of souls who have never been set free. Most of them are the people Pedro slaughtered after his father died. By the way, Damiana, how did you know I was coming? Damiana remained silent at the question. Juan asks, are you alive or dead? But before he can finish, Damiana vanishes around the corner like a gust of wind. Juan shouts for her, but in the darkness of the empty alley, there is only him. Paralyzed by the silence, Juan thought of his mother. After sending her to her sister's house, his father never went back for her once. Until the day she died, she dreamed of returning to Comala. Suddenly, the whispers of two women were heard. They hid in a nearby house upon seeing someone. Juan rushes toward them, but they vanish into thin air. Not only that, in the moonlight, Juan sees the helpless people Pedro had brutally murdered. Trapped in a web of dreams and reality, Juan runs for his life, trips, and falls, where he sees a couple. They offer him shelter and promise to show him the way in the morning. So the exhausted Juan collapses on the floor. All night, Juan shivers with fever. When he wakes up, he sees the girl sitting naked beside him. The man with her isn't her husband, but her brother. Over time, from Pedro to Miguel, they have all taken advantage of her. And perhaps Juan will too. But Juan ignores her body and falls back into a deep sleep. Time flows like a river. When he wakes up, he sees the girl's flesh has turned into mud. Her brother's soul had been waiting for another man all this time. Now he's gone, and the girl's soul is finally at peace. The entire room is filled with mud. Terrified, Juan bolts out of the house. The sound of murmurs and music drifts in from a distant alley. Juan follows the noise. He eventually reaches a field and sees the restless spirits of men and women wandering naked in the sky. Seeing this horrific sight, Juan loses his life. Some time has passed since then. Even in death, Juan hasn't uncovered all of Pedro Paramo's secrets. What was his true mystery? At what dark moment in life did Pedro's path begin? But there's no need to worry, because Dorotea is here. To tell this untold story, Pedro came to Comala as a child with his grandparents. From the start, his life was shaped by a different way of thinking. He never learned to bow down to anyone, but all his pride and stubbornness would vanish before one person. She was his only love, Susanna. They spent such beautiful moments together. Susanna, who lost her mother, loved Pedro even more than her own father. But one day, her father took Susanna and left Comala for Mascotas forever. At the edge of a Comala alley, Pedro saw Susanna for the last time. After that, a strange change came over him. He couldn't focus on anything at home. His grandmother warned that this obsession would eventually destroy him. One day, his father's body was brought into the courtyard. Someone had murdered him. Pedro was in no state to speak or act that day. Many years went by. Pedro's son, Miguel, was carrying out his crimes. Every morning, he'd go to Damiana's house looking for food. Miguel made a deal with her every day. Dorotea would bring a girl from Cantla for him. In exchange, she would be fed like royalty. That day, Fulgur brings news of a murder charge against Miguel. Pedro isn't worried about his son's actions. He's just a boy. These kinds of things are nothing to him. Besides, everyone can be bought for the right price. Yet, amidst all the chaos, Pedro never forgot Susanna. Once Pedro took control of Comala and Media Luna, he hired people to find Susanna in Mascotas and across Mexico. Meanwhile, while traveling from Cantla, Miguel dies falling from a horse. Just as his father's body was brought home, Miguel was brought back the same way. It was like a recurring nightmare. On the day of the funeral, the priest refuses to pray for Miguel's soul, because Miguel killed the priest's brother and assaulted his niece. But in this world, money and power talk. Is this really God's justice? The stories of the pregnant girls Pedro used, who go to the priest every day to confess. Everything blurs in the judgment of sin and virtue, but Pedro still remembers every second spent with Susanna as a child. His love for her wasn't about the flesh, but from the soul. In various parts of Mexico, people are uprising over land rights. To avoid the trouble, Susanna and her father return to Comala. But Fulgur brings news that shakes Pedro to his core. Susanna is now suffering from mental illness. Learning this, Pedro offers to marry Susanna instead of giving her father the mine. The father told Pedro that Susanna was a widow and her grief had broken her. But Pedro didn't back down. He won't miss the chance to have Susanna back. Seeing her, Pedro felt like a child again. Even now, the thought of her makes his heart ache. He thought she would run into his arms the moment she saw him. He thought she would fix his messy life. But when she steps off the carriage, he realizes this isn't the Susanna he knew. Pedro couldn't believe his eyes. Time passes, but Susanna can never accept him. The man who abused so many women without a second thought never touched Susanna once without her permission. Then, news came that Susanna's father died in a mining accident. Susanna didn't seem to care. There's a strange emptiness in her eyes. To find out why she acts this way, Pedro investigates and learns a horrific truth. After leaving Comala, Susanna's father began to treat his own daughter as a wife. Because this nightmare lasted for years, Susanna's mind finally snapped. She couldn't stand the touch of any man. After learning this, Pedro sent men to the mine to kill her father. Whether it was his grandmother's curse or just bad luck, Pedro's life never saw the light again. Many in Mexico took up arms against the oppressive government and the land grabbers. Fulgur was the first to fall. Pedro tried to manage the rebels by bribing them to join his side. But even though money fixed everything else, Pedro finally lost. From an overdose of sedatives, Susanna left this world behind. In that moment, Pedro loses everything. In the face of this pain, his wealth means nothing. That day, the priest rang the bells to announce her death. The sound echoed from Comala to the edges of Media Luna. People came from all the neighboring towns. But after the crowd gathered, the mourning turned into a festival. From fairs to circuses, all of Comala began to celebrate. The sound of dancing and fireworks filled the air. From a distance, Pedro watches in disbelief. His heart is filled with rage and the agony of loss. When Damiana hesitantly asks him to sit down and rest, he answers, "If I really sit down, Comala will die with me." This was likely Pedro's end. Days, nights, and years slip away. Pedro never stood up again. He left behind a legacy of sin and a deep, burning hatred for Comala. The whole town is turning to dust before his eyes. Everyone has fled their homes to stay alive, because Pedro has withdrawn his hand from the village. The last loyal follower is off fighting with the rebels against the church. But Pedro doesn't care about any of it anymore, because he still sees Susanna's final journey in his mind. Like the young Susanna saying goodbye. That same look, that same heartbreaking feeling that words can't describe. Comala is empty now, home only to the restless spirits the priest never freed. And there was the lonely outcast Dorotea, who has no one left. She has no dreams. What is there left to live for? Even Pedro wasn't spared, and she is just a simple outcast. For her, even breathing now feels like a burden. When she finds Juan's body in the streets of Comala, Dorotea finally lets go. She wasn't even given a grave of her own. She was buried right there with Juan. All this time, Dorotea, lying in the grave, was telling Juan about Pedro's life. Juan asks, "So, how did my father actually die?" Dorotea began the final chapter. After Susanna died and Comala was abandoned, Abundio's wife died of sickness. With nowhere else to turn, Abundio went to Pedro for help with the burial. But he didn't know that Pedro, lost in a sleepless haze, had abandoned the people of Comala long ago. When Pedro refused to help, a drunken Abundio killed both Pedro and Damiana. Pedro didn't even try to stop him. Perhaps he had been waiting for this day all along. The fire still burns in Pedro's heart. He could have stood up and screamed if he wanted to. But for what? Who would get up now? Who would put in the effort to fall in love all over again? Just to have their heart broken? If Susanna had said yes just once, he would have cheated death to come back. But not today. Maybe in some other time they will wake up together. In some alley in Mexico, they'll be running down the same street, falling in love all over again. If you enjoyed this dark and mysterious story, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to Ghostly Screen for more horror explained videos, because the next story might be even darker.